What if I told you that with the Gardenary way of setting up and planting the garden, you can completely eliminate weeding forever? Over the next few minutes, I'm going to teach you this exact method so that you can have a stress-free and low-maintenance, weed-free garden. Let's get started. First, let's talk about the two places these weeds are coming from. We've got weeds coming from the ground and we've got weeds coming from the air. The ones in the ground are coming as runners. So lots of plants that grow near your garden space, things like grasses and ground covers, they have the need to spread, and they often spread through runners that they send from their roots underground so that those roots then grow up and create sprouts that show up in your garden. Then we have airborne weeds. Many plants have seed systems where the seeds are encased in light, fluffy material that catches the wind easily and carries these seeds through the air to new spaces in nature. Oftentimes, these seeds land right in the middle of your garden space. So even if you don't have a grass or a ground cover that's likely to spread in your garden underground, you can still have weeds in your garden that literally showed up out of thin air. Now let's talk about the two places that weeds are going to show up in your garden space. First up, you're going to have them in your actual growing beds, right alongside the plants that you're hoping to grow. So weeds will pop up from underground right alongside your intended plants, and they'll also get carried there from the air and show up among seeds that you planted just a few weeks ago. You'll also see weeds growing in the pathways. Places that you've cleared out to make entrance and exit into the garden easier will often end up with airborne or underground-borne weeds. Now for the good part. Let's talk about how to eliminate those weeds so you don't have to bend down and pull even one. Let's talk about how to prevent weeds in the pathways and in the growing beds. I'll start out with the paths. There are two steps to take care of weeds in your pathways, and the first is to clear. This is really best done at the outset of setting up your garden space, but if you're watching this and your garden is already set up, you'll be able to take today's lessons and hopefully retrofit your garden space a little bit. So the first step to dealing with weeds in the path is to clear the entire space. You want to be extremely thorough with this step and do all you can to get all of the vegetation completely cleared from your garden space before you set up your garden paths and growing beds. We'll use a shovel, a weed eater, or even a sod cutter to pull all the grass or ground cover from the garden area. If you've got a grass in your area that grows persistently through runners, then you want to be sure you completely kill off all the grass or ground cover around that area. You may have to do something more than just using a shovel or a sod cutter. You may actually need to fully kill the plants in that area, either by spraying it with a concentrated vinegar solution or even by taking a torch to it. Both of these are organic methods. They don't use anything that would harm nature, but they do fully kill the plant from its root, so it won't be spreading into your pathway space. That's the first step to a weed-free pathway, is completely clearing the area of vegetation. Now it's time to cover. Now before you add mulch or stone or gravel to your pathways, I highly recommend putting a layer right in between. Now let's go shopping and I'll show you what I would and would not buy to do exactly this.
This is the strongest thing you can buy to put underneath your garden. It's called Ram Board. It's a temporary floor protection. They have this brand. This is literally Ram Board, and this one is called X Board. They run $40 for 100 feet. So it covers, each of these covers 300 square feet with just one roll. So 300 square feet is covered with this one roll. I think this one is as well. So this brand name is 36 by 50 feet. So this would cover 180 square feet. And this one would cover 360 square feet. So a ton of space in your garden. This is what I put underneath my garden beds. And it's well worth the money. So it's going to slowly break down underneath the garden, but it's going to block out the weeds. It's incredible. So $40 might seem like a lot for just a big roll of paper, but this is going to save you so much time and hassle for years to come in the garden. $40 over 360 square feet. This is like 10 cents a square foot to cover your space. and it really gets the job done. It's a much more sustainable way to do it than using recloth. All right, this is a second cheaper option. If you don't have a lot of in-ground weeds, if you don't have a glass that tends to spread through runners, then you can use this cheaper option. It's much thinner. It's a builder's paper, and you can see this is $13 for 408 square feet. So if you don't have the spreading grass that grows in your garden area, or you don't have a lot of weeds that you know you're going to be fighting, you can absolutely use this cheaper paper to get started. Most people, including myself, used to use this stuff. This is weed barrier cloth. It's got lots of plastics inside of it, and it's just a no-go. Anytime you want to plant inside any space, it's going to be terrible to get inside this to make room to plant. It's just not worth it. It's going to impact the environment negatively. And why use this when you could use brown paper that biodegrades instead?
All right, once you've got your middle layer, then you are ready to completely cover your pathways with mulch or gravel or stone, anything that's going to make it nice and easy for you to get into your pathways. And now you can be sure they will stay weed-free. Did you know that people will actually pay you to do all this work for them? When I first started my garden coaching business back in 2015, I thought all I was gonna do was talk to people about setting up their garden. But then they turn to me and look and say, well, Nicole, can you do that for me? And I realized they would pay me to do it. So first I did the work, and then I hired other people to do the work. And then I turned it into an entire business of giving people advice about the garden and then actually doing the work for them. The heavy lifting of clearing and covering and setting up the raised beds and even planting the raised beds. It's called garden consulting, and I would love to teach you how you could do this too. If you want to apply to become a Gardenary consultant, you can find out a link right below this video where you can apply. Now let's talk about the garden beds. The easiest way to be sure that you do not end up with weeds in your garden is to elevate them. Getting your gardens at least 6 inches to 1 foot off the ground is going to make weeding a thing of the past when it comes to gardening. My favorite way to do this is by setting up raised beds. In fact, when it comes to preventing weeds, the taller the raised bed, the better. Once you set up your raised beds, the way you plant those raised beds also matters when it comes to weed prevention. Instead of spacing out the plants like all the plant tags tell you to do, I recommend my method of intensive planting, giving each plant the space it needs and nothing more. With our intensive planting method, within 6 weeks of planting the garden, when you come back and peer over your garden beds, you should see no exposed soil. This is a critical step to preventing weeds because weeds grow in open spaces. Remember, nature abhors a void. So if you filled all that space with the plants you actually want to grow, guess what? You've literally eliminated the weeds' possibilities. They can't get sun, they can't get nutrients, they can't get space if you've already filled it up yourself. Now these two steps, both clearing and covering in the pathways and elevating and overplanting in the beds, will definitely take care of all those in-ground weeds. You're not going to get a weed growing up 1 foot or 2 feet into your raised bed from underground, and you'll rarely, if ever, see one pop up in the pathway. Now let's be real, we're not talking paradise here. Every now and again, even using this pretty close to perfect Gardenary system, an airborne weed might show up. But airborne weeds have such small root systems that I can literally kick it with my foot as I walk through the pathway, or just simply move it out of the way as I harvest my dinner from my raised beds. In fact, over the last few years, I can count on one hand the number of times I've touched a weed in my garden space, and I'm out there almost every day. So let's say goodbye to garden weeds for good. If you love the idea of stress-free and low-maintenance gardening, you better hit that subscribe button right away, because that is all we are about here at Gardenary. And I've got a ton of low-maintenance, stress-free gardening tips and hacks coming your way this season. Got someone who's really frustrated with pulling all those weeds in the garden? Be sure you share this video with them so they don't quit because they're tired of pulling weeds. And then tell me in the comments which part of this video you like the most and you think might actually work in your own garden space. And I'll be back in just a few days to give you another gardening tip to make it easy and stress-free for you this year.